Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Hello from Melbourne and New York this morning, and this evening for Melissa. On the other screen, you have a very good friend and a client of ours, Melissa Welch. So I'll tell you a little bit more about her, and then I'll hand over to her to tell you more still about her journey towards Polish citizenship. Melissa's a lawyer. She works at a very big hospital in New York City, and we met probably about 3 years ago now, Melissa?
Something like that? 3 years in September.
Right. She's someone that is so incredibly detailed and so incredibly lovely that I'm really, really pleased to be able to share Melissa's journey with the rest of the world and anybody that's interested in what happens for people that work with us. But initially we met because we were hoping to that you qualify for citizenship through descent. Is that right? Tell us more about your Polish family. Who's Polish in your family?
Okay. Well, my grandmother was first generation born in the U.S. and her parents had left Poland in 1911 and 1912, and then they married in Boston in 1913. So my grandmother was born, she's number 6, I think, out of the 8 kids. So she was born a bit later she was born in 1925 after they had some of their other kids. But they were in a village about an hour and 15 minutes northwest of Warsaw. And they left before 1918 when Polish regained its statehood. So I was hoping to go through descent, but obviously with all the Polish citizenship laws, that the first route wasn't in the cards just because of the laws.
So we couldn't make it work. And then at some point you decided, okay, I'm going to give it a go anyway. What happened?
Well, I met with you. You actually were in New York on a trip. I don't know how Eva does it, but she travels.
She does
everywhere. And she's in New York quite a bit, even though she's based in Australia. So you actually came to the hospital and met with me, and I had one little piece of paper with a few details on it. And I told you, I understand, because you have a wonderful blog, the Professor Adamski blog, which I still read on the Polaron site. So I understood that I didn't qualify because of some of the dates of my family history, but I saw on your site there was the grant route. And I said, I know it's a difficult process. I know it's a lot of work, but it's something I'm really interested in. So you sort of gave me a list of documents that I should gather if I was really serious about this project. So it took me about 6 months after that to get you the documents before your team could assess my eligibility for the grant and whether I'd be a good fit for the process.
And you are an absolutely excellent fit. And just before we started the session, you were telling me that you are now quite a proficient Polish speaker. Is that right? Would you call yourself that or not yet?
Mówiłam po polsku trochę. Yeah, I understand a lot, because in New York City, the great thing is there's so many people from Poland or first or second generation, and I understand a lot now, and I'm better at reading and writing than I am speaking, but I've been studying now almost 2 years. And I was telling you before, I have a wonderful teacher here in New York. We're now on Zoom, which is fine. But I'm in a small group of very dedicated students, and we're kind of moving along at a good pace now. It was intimidating at first because my first class, we'd have the 8 sessions, half the class would not come back. So that kept happening. I had to wait a bit to rejoin with the group, but now I'm in a group that has no intention of stopping. So now I'm really moving quickly through the grammar and everything like that.
And just going back to your grandmother for a moment, was she the last Polish-speaking person in your family?
She was. And the last time I did a school project on her when I was 13, and we sat in her kitchen. She was living outside of Boston and with my grandfather in a suburb. And I remember sitting, she always sort of she was always in the kitchen. She was the typical Polish grandmother, always cooking. And I had to do a school project on a grandparent. And she was definitely more talkative than my grandfather. And I only had the 2 left. So I asked her to do it. And it's funny because I knew her parents were from Poland, but I never really asked her any questions about it. And then I had this I was always kind of a curious kid. I asked a lot of questions of everybody, but this was the first time I got to sit with her for hours and ask her what was it like to have Polish parents? And that was the first time it dawned on me. Well, she said, I grew up in a Polish speaking household. That was my first language. I think when you're a kid, you don't realize your grandparents and parents had lives before you. So it was a really wonderful experience because we sat at her table for a couple hours and I got to ask her all of these questions about her parents, and she spoke Polish for me quite a bit, and their holidays, and then about 6 months later, about a few weeks after that, she was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer, and about 6 months later she was gone.
Wow.
So I actually found, I think I sent you the scans of the essay I wrote. I was 13.
You did.
My dad found it over Christmas time in his shed, asked me to clean out my school papers, and I had been looking for it. It was, I thought about it, and I was like, oh, I probably got rid of it. And it was over Christmas time, I actually found it. So it was kind of nice to actually read. I was 13, so it's not my finest writing, but to read the essay and have some of her quotes, and it really brought back the interview. And I was like, I think I was meant to do this. Like, I think after she passed, it was always in the back of my brain that I want to learn more about her heritage. And I think I always sort of gravitated towards, I would always find the Polish person in a group. My law school roommate, her parents were from Poland. One of my closest friends now, New York City, I met her in a French class, but she's actually from Poland. So I feel like I'm always sort of, without even consciously being aware, sort of trying to get a bit closer to my Polish heritage. And when I was in college, I studied a lot of Eastern European history and the history of the Cold War. And I don't know, I just feel like everything that I've done so far has sort of been taking me here.
So
and now I'm putting it together.
So it's a connection, isn't it? And I guess people that I talked to prior to them embarking on this journey, and it is a massive journey of discovery, I do tell them to start thinking of themselves as Polish. So rather than them think of us, has that happened to you? Do you think of yourself as Polish?
I probably do now. When I started, I sort of felt more like an outsider, like looking in. Mm-hmm. And I was very nervous when I started going to some of the events in the city at the Kosciuszko Foundation, or there's a group called the New York City Polish Social Group. And these groups couldn't be any more welcoming, but I felt like I was an outsider looking in. But I think now with my Polish studies and my trips to Poland, I sort of feel like the identity is forming more and more. And I have your booklet on the front of my binder that says reclaim your Polish citizenship. So I feel like maybe the identity was there, and now I'm reclaiming it. It was always there, but I had to bring it out.
So speaking of your trips to Poland, what did you think when you went? So you've been twice, am I right?
Yeah.
How did you find the country? And you've already mentioned that people are hospitable and they've embraced you. And I think when you tell people that you embark on this journey, I think everyone's very excited and they want to help. But how did you find Poland of today? Because I guess I'm asking from this point of view of it having become somewhat of a controversial place, like you read in the media, politics, this, that, pushing and shoving. But what are Polish people like, and how did you find Poland when you went?
I mean, I can say the minute I stepped off the plane, it's definitely a country that should be known for its hospitality. I had actually, my first trip to Poland, I had spent the week before in Paris taking a course, and I told you I had been robbed that week in Paris. So my family assumed I was coming home and not going to Poland, and I said, well, everything's been stolen, I'm still gonna go. And I didn't know, I couldn't speak a word of Polish when I went the first time. And I had called the hotel and I said, is there any way you could find me a driver to take me to my great-grandparents' village? And once I told the concierge at the hotel what I was trying to do, he's like, oh, of course, we're going to find you someone. Don't worry. It's someone we work with all the time. So Darius, who's still my friend, who I still talk to regularly, took me to my great-grandparents' village. But he didn't just take me to the village. He stopped at so many places along the way. He made sure I got the photos I wanted. One of my phones had been stolen, so then I made him take extras on his phone. And then when we got to my great-grandparents' church, where they both had been baptized and where all their family celebrations had taken place in this church, and funerals and everything. My whole family history on the Polish side was in this church, about an hour and 15 minutes from Warsaw. And we just went into the church. We didn't ask. and the lights were off, and I was trying to take photos. And then all of a sudden the caretaker came running in. And I didn't speak Polish at this point, and he's kind of speaking very loudly to Dariusz. And I thought we were both in trouble. Maybe they're going to call the police. It was actually scolding Dariusz for not turning the lights on so that I couldn't, so I could get better photos. And then he turned all the lights on. He lit the candles in the church so I could take my photos. And then he rang the bells in my honor in the courtyard.
Aww.
And it was like, he didn't know me. He just thought it was so amazing that I traveled from New York to go to this church, just to see where my great-grandparents had been baptized. So I feel like that was the start of my experience with Polish people. And the first trip was amazing. Even though I didn't speak Polish, I was asking, random people on the street, can you take photos? And even without speaking Polish, people are so patient. That's what I find about, you don't want to stereotype anyone, but I find Polish people to be very calm and patient, especially me, because I wanted just the right photo. And they were very, as many photos as I needed, they were taking them. But then my second trip, when I actually spoke some Polish, it was like a whole different trip, because I felt immersed more in the culture. I could read the menus. I could speak, to the waiters and ask people for little things in the shops. And it was great because this time I left Warsaw. So it was great actually seeing other cities and kind of get the vibe from other cities. I went to Krakow, and Krakow wasn't destroyed during World War II, so the architecture is different. It's a little bit slower than Warsaw, which is it's a smaller city. And my friend Dariusz said I had to go to Łódź. He took me to Łódź to see all the art and sort of the revitalization of the city. And I don't know, but wherever I go, I would tell people what I'm doing. They bend over backwards to tell me about the history of their town, their city, help me take photos. And everyone I've met in Warsaw or in Poland, I talk to regularly, and I feel like they're all rooting me on. A few of them are writing letters for me, letters of recommendation. And I feel like once a Polish person is in your life, they consider it a lifelong bond. And I'm very disappointed, obviously, that I can't travel this summer, but I'm just really excited to go back and see so much more of the country.
So I have two questions. Firstly, did you feel a sense of coming home when you went to Poland? And the second question I have is about your dad, because your father is the connection to your grandmother and your grandfather, I guess. Because he's never been, right? Am I correct? Your dad?
Yeah, I was hoping to take my parents this summer. Yeah. So that's going to have to wait. But my parents, especially my dad, has been sort of my quiet buddy on this project. Because my dad, he's not very talkative, but he knew where every single person was buried and where.
Wow.
And he's been maintaining the graves of my great-grandparents and also my grandparents. So I found a tremendous amount of information by going to the cemeteries, actually. And they're Catholic cemeteries, and there's, they have offices that are run, they have day-to-day staff. And I was able to get a huge amount of information just by knowing the gravestone and the records of the associations maintaining the cemeteries. But that's all for my dad. It's my dad, he's been quietly maintaining these grave sites, which I never knew about. I think I went a few times when I was a kid, but I didn't, it's not something I would have done regularly, but now it's like, when I go home to Boston, I go. And my dad, he knew, that he was driving me to all the archives in Massachusetts, waiting for me out in the car while I did research, or coming back for me 5 hours later. So he's been a silent ally. He doesn't say much, but he's starting to tell me more stories about his grandparents and my grandmother in relation to their Polish traditions. And I think a lot of people just forget, like they put it, once the person passes, sometimes they put it in the back of their mind. But now that I'm so interested, and it's not just my dad has 5 siblings, and they've all been very engaged with the project. Like my Aunt Marianne, she gave me my great-grandmother's engagement ring.
Oh, wow.
And it has an M inscribed in it. So my great-grandmother's Michalina, and I'm Melissa, so we have the same initials. So she gave me the engagement ring. And then my other aunt, Arlene, gave me her pocket watch, which has an M on it. So it's like things are coming to the surface that people forgot about, or it just didn't, in your daily life, you're not thinking, oh, my great grandparents, they died, in the late 1950s. So it's just, people forget what they had and what they remember, but now my family's talking about it. And December 2018, I think, I created a big PDF of everything that I had found on the family, and I sent it to them right before our Christmas party. And people were really engaged in going through the packet. It was, 100 plus pages, and asking me lots of questions. So it started a conversation that wasn't there before.
And that's really interesting, because we do have, this is a common theme, I guess, with that generation of your dad, of your parents, being kind of displaced to the point where it's really hard to reconnect, because, I hear that from, our clients or their parents, that they kind of feel intimidated by this whole Polish thing. And one of the reasons they've never been is not because they have no money or time or inclination. It's just that barrier of something really quite emotional that stops them from pursuing it. Or, some of them have even said to me, look, I feel a bit like a fraud. But the reality is that their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents left to make a new life in America. And, often the language is the first thing that went. And there was also, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a bit of, it wasn't very cool to be Polish at some point in America. And now it is. So it's really interesting to hear what you say.
Well, that's true, because I grew up in the 1980s. I remember when the Berlin Wall came down, people were quietly Polish at home, I think. They weren't, there were Polish associations and groups and Polish churches, but people weren't very vocal about their connections to Poland, just because of the history then. And there were, I did grow up with a lot of Polish jokes. But now I'm like, if people saw how difficult the Polish, it's not difficult, but the spelling of Polish words and the pronunciation.
Yeah.
You would never say that a Polish person is not highly intelligent, because the language is way more complex than English. So I feel like I'm really glad that I'm learning Polish, because I'm like, this is far more difficult than English and French, which I know. So I feel like the stereotypes, you hear them, but they were obviously just wrong. But now Poland's like considered, it's always in the New York Times, for being an economic powerhouse now, and an economy that's growing super fast, and all these big corporations now, their interest now is shifting from Western Europe to Central Europe. And Warsaw, if you go to Warsaw, first time I went, I could not believe just how modern and thriving it was. I didn't know what I was going to expect, because I had studied the history around World War II and during the Cold War very heavily. So I didn't know what to expect. And it's just a thriving, the downtown area is thriving. But what I love about Warsaw is that the history is such an important part of the city life. And you go into Old Town, and what's beautiful is that people really have a sense of pride, I think, in the city, and that it was rebuilt brick by brick after the war. And so there's just this sense of like ownership and pride in the city because of the history and what they lost during the war, but they came back and rebuilt. The buildings if you look at pictures of the buildings before and after the war when they were rebuilt, they're replicas. The churches are replicas of what was there before. And I don't know a lot of places that would build an exact replica of what was there before. It's really amazing.
Yeah. In fact, and you'd know this, but just after the war, temporarily, the Polish capital was the city of Helm, which is near Lublin, and they did consider moving the capital elsewhere, because it was so completely flattened and destroyed. And it was that part of that Polish pride that sort of lifted everyone's spirit, and they just rolled up their sleeves and just got on with it, which is kind of part of the Polish makeup. We just get on with things. We're pretty pragmatic. You can't generalize, but generally speaking, we're sort of quiet achievers, behind the scenes, hard workers. And from what you said, your father, your grandparents, your great grandparents were a bit like that. So some of them are kind of behind the scenes quiet achievers. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think it's the Irish side too. You don't.
Yes.
You just don't talk about your achievements, and you quietly do it. And when things go wrong, it's just get on with it. you know,
Your
it's
family is
just,
very, very proud of you, are they not?
I think so. I think at first they thought I was a bit, I'm always off doing something very strange or they roll their eyes at, but now that I'm so far into the process, I think they're really glad that I did it. But I think the first time when I said, I'm going to Poland by myself, I don't speak any Polish. And then I got robbed in Paris and everyone definitely thought I was coming home. And I was like, nope, I'm still going. I think they thought that was a bit much, but now that I'm so close to filing, I think they're proud of what I was able to find and how I was able to connect the whole family to my grandmother's past and to honor her in a new way. I mean, we always loved my grandmother. We miss her terribly, but to honor her parents and what they did and what they sacrificed and what they had to do to get here and build a life. And now to see their like citizenship papers and their fingerprints and their signatures and just to see things in their own hand, even though it's just the scans of these documents, I don't know, it just feels like that's what the connection is for me, is to see the personal aspects of this that I never would have had it if I hadn't gone through this process. So it's like, of course, in the beginning, you're thinking, oh, I'd love to have the passport, the EU passport and all that. But now I'm thinking more in terms of, no, I would like to be a Polish citizen. I would like to continue that link and to make sure the legacy goes on. And maybe my brother and my brothers and my sister would do it, or my cousins, and to keep, because I feel like if we don't continue the legacy, who will?
And I think some of the things you mentioned there are, for me personally and professionally, are very interesting, because there's so much you can read between the lines through documents. And I think you've amassed quite a massive folio of documents, from archival records to even you know, your school project at the age of 13. Was there anything that you discovered about your family that was a little bit surprising, do you think?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I mean, the first thing is my family so heavily identifies with Boston, and none of us knew my great-grandfather had started his journey in New York. So I'd always thought my older brother was the first one to come to New York and make a life, and that's not true. Because my grandfather actually had 2 passenger ship records from Poland to New York. And the first time he came to New York, his sister Mariana was here. And at some point he went back to Poland, and then he came back to New York, and then somehow ended up in Boston. But I couldn't find his passenger ship record because I was looking through the Boston records. It didn't even occur to me that he might have started elsewhere. So that was really interesting. And I didn't know he had brothers. He had siblings who came to the US, which, you know, I never knew about. And one of his brothers actually died during the last pandemic.
Okay.
And I had found the grave of his brothers is very close to his grave. And we had driven past these graves so many times, and none of us knew. My dad didn't know that his grandfather's 2 brothers were buried so close to where my great-grandfather was buried. And it's like the stone was so badly neglected. And it's like, I just think families should honor, if they can, the grave sites of their relatives. And now we know where it is, but it's just things like that we didn't know. And then there were some, you know, my grandfather's name, his birth name, his civil birth record, and his baptismal record, the names are different. And what I found out, because my family, my grandfather is Albert J. Welch. We have a construction company in Boston, and there's AJW is literally on everything. License plates and just everything. It's been, these 3 initials have been such a core part of my identity. And I discovered that through my grandparents' marriage record, that his name was actually Albert Murphy Welch, and his parents changed his name at the baptism, which the archivist told me the Catholics were notorious for changing names during the baptism and never recording them.
Okay, do we know why?
They would just sometimes have a change of thought, or I guess Catholics back then considered the baptism to be the birth certificate didn't hold much weight.
Yeah.
It was the baptism. So they'd often wait a month or 2 before the baptism and then get to the baptism and give the priest what their actual name should be. So the archivist told me, oh yeah, like that happened all the time. But it's just, it's like things like that you didn't know, that not that it changes anything, but it's like it just gives you more family history, because my grandfather's parents had lost a baby and had given that baby the same name. And then my grandfather was the second baby when we always thought he was the first baby. So I guess they had misgivings about giving the second baby the same name. But then at the baptism, they decided to go back and call him, a junior. He was Albert J. Welch Jr. But then my uncle's Albert J. Welch III, and then my cousin's Albert J. Welch IV. Technically, the civil name was not that.
Right. So you've got that initial carried through several generations, AJW.
Well, that's what made it difficult also to find my grandparents' marriage record, because they were saying, the archivist is like, oh, I found it. I'm like, oh, no, that's not my grandfather's name. And he's like, but that's what's in the record. I'm like, well, that wasn't his name.
Okay.
So I thought I had the wrong record. I'm like, no, I was the one who was wrong. So you find so many unexpected things along the way. So that's what I think makes the journey worth it, because you don't even know what you're looking for. And then you find these things, and I don't know, it's priceless, I think, to find this forgotten history of your family. And so it's almost like I've forgotten about why I started this, because I don't focus on that anymore.
It's become something else, and it's become
I
guess a journey of discovery. And I think if you can take your family for that ride, that makes that genuine connection. And hopefully when this pandemic's over, you can take your parents to Poland and show them around and go back to that church you've spoken about with such passion. And I think because Poland's such an old country, that history is still there, and you can actually walk in your great-grandparents' footsteps, which is quite amazing. And I think you were able to see that a lot of the architecture is still there, some of it rebuilt, but there are particularly churches that some of them are hundreds of years old, and that's quite amazing that it's still there in that village, the church.
And it's so well maintained. I mean, the pride the village takes in this Catholic church, it's just, but everyone's welcome. I mean, I just walked in and I was welcome. So that's another nice thing, is that people should take advantage and explore, because I feel like you will be welcome with open arms.
Well, there you go. We've got just about 3 minutes, Melissa, for some questions. Andrea, over to you. Tell us what we've got there for Melissa.
Thank you. So I've collected a couple of questions for Melissa. One of them, so someone is saying that what a fascinating story, Melissa. Any advice you can share with the audience about your journey? And the other questions, just two questions in one. Why didn't you qualify for Polish citizenship by descent, and which option did you take at the end?
Okay, so I would think if you're thinking of starting this journey, the most helpful thing I found is trying to find records at the local level, or maybe, because I know in the end you need the civil records, but I found the church records in Boston for my family to be the most helpful. And some of the churches are still open, and I went and was able to find so many details, because all churches have registries for families and sacraments. So that was the greatest resource I had in terms of putting my family's complete picture together. I didn't know it at the time, but the churches held a key to most of what I was looking for. And then in terms of looking for like civil marriage certificates, it was easier for me to find records by going to the local level, like the city of Boston, as opposed to the Massachusetts State Archives. Because sometimes at the local level, these records were all sent to the archives by hand back in the day, and some of them didn't make it there. So my great-grandparents' civil marriage record never made it to the state archives, but it was there in the city of Boston archives. So I find maybe thinking locally before you think, the upper levels of government agencies might be helpful for some of you who are looking for records. And in terms of descent versus the presidential grant route, my great-grandparents had left, and Eva is the expert on this, but they had left before 1918. So that created some issues with the dates. And also there was the Polish citizenship law of 1951. My grandmother married my grandfather in 1946. So my grandfather was an American citizen. So to my knowledge, she sort of lost her Polish citizenship because she married before 1951. January 19th, 1951, right?
That's the date. That's the date, and that is why Melissa couldn't pursue the descent route. And I think we should explain that you can't pursue grant if there's any chance whatsoever that you might qualify through descent. So that avenue had to be excluded first. And so prior to 1951, on 19th of January 1951, you couldn't hold dual citizenship in Poland. So if you became a citizen of another country, for women married a foreign citizen, held public office or served in a foreign army, unless it was an allied force, you would lose your Polish citizenship, for most people. So we excluded that possibility, and the only option for Melissa was therefore to pursue through the presidential grant, which is what we in a very, very, very final stages of, essentially. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, thank you so much. The second question would be, do you have to submit original documents that you get from the archives when you submit your application to the Polish government? If so, do they return the documents to you?
I might grab that one, Melissa, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The answer is yes and no. It depends what documents. But for the grant option, because it involves a personal interview where you come to the consulate with a file full of papers, they can cite and certify the documents for you and then return them to you. The only things that will not be returned are things like your birth certificate, because based on that, we register a Polish birth certificate for you in Poland, and marriage if you're married. So Melissa, for example, has a Polish birth certificate now, and her original or her duplicate American birth certificate is in the Polish registry office. So, but all the other documents, for the most part, can be certified, notarized, certified at the consulate. There's all kinds of ways to not have to give the Polish government the originals, and we work with everyone at trying to guide them through that, because it is quite complicated. So some of them have to have apostilles, others can be notarized. It depends what document, in other words. Yeah.
Yeah, like my diplomas, I have certified copies of things like that are, things I don't, like my college diploma I'd like to keep. So I have a certified copy of that. So stuff like that. But some things I don't mind giving and not seeing again. So I guess you work with Polaron on that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we give you guidance as to what's required or what isn't, but as much as we can, especially if they've, original archival documents, we wouldn't want you to part with them. So we work around it.
Thank you, guys. So last question. My grandmother was Polish and she passed away when I was just a baby. So I didn't have that strong connection with Poland, really. How do I reconnect with my heritage? So is there any recommendation from you, Melissa?
Yeah, just start small. If you're in a place where there's a Polish American organization, or maybe a Polish church, or even some Polish restaurants or something like that, if there's anything like that you can join locally in your area, just start small. Because I think as Americans, anyway, I'm just speaking as an American, you worry that, as Eva said before, you're going to be considered an imposter or a fraud. But that hasn't been my experience at all. I mean, I just joined a few groups. I started going to events, and sometimes people would speak to me right away in Polish, and I just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak Polish, or I only speak a little," and that was no problem. So I don't think you necessarily. I think this is about you having the curiosity about Poland and about your family heritage. And unfortunately, your grandmother passed. So I think people would be very curious in trying to help you build some sort of identity. So I wouldn't let that hold you back. But especially now, there's so many groups online that you could join. There's so many Zooms and all these things going on. So you don't even necessarily have to join a group where you're going to in-person events. I mean, there's so many groups that are happening now online. So I would just start small like that. But don't let the fear that, okay, this is my grandmother, what isn't here now, or wasn't with me till very later in life. I mean, that doesn't matter. I wouldn't let that hold you back. If you find a group that you're interested in, just join.
Yeah, and that's excellent advice. And I think, you know, sometimes when people are considering going through this journey, they will say things to me like, well, you know, I hear that there are a lot of rejections in Poland. And this is what I have to say to them, is that unless you make it a sincere, genuine effort of wanting to be Polish, don't bother. And the rejections that you hear of are potentially from people that don't know how much work actually goes into this. And, you know, in the last half hour, you heard of Melissa's journey, but that's kind of like the front end, what's happened. Behind the scenes, there's like a massive, massive undertaking of organizing documents, getting letters of recommendation, translating things, learning Polish. So it is a big journey. But if and unless it's a sincere, genuine, engaging effort on your part, it's not going to work. So I think it means also different things to different people. So for Melissa, she happened to meet her grandmother. For other people, you know, they go back further generations. But the advice, and I echo what Melissa said, is just give it a go. Just try and see what it means to you, what it means to your identity, what it means to you as a person, what things you can discover through documents, through learning the language, through learning the history, because that connection will be there if you genuinely look for it. And I think on that note, what I would like to do is thank Melissa very much. I was a bit nervous about asking her to take part in this because, you know, there's some level of vulnerability, I think, when you talk about who you are as a person and how you discovering things. So I am so very grateful, Melissa, to you. And I wanted to thank you for dedicating your evening. I know it's already quite late in New York, so thank you so very much. And hopefully we've inspired some people and we've given them a look into your journey and what it means to you. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say before we sign off, I can't say enough about Eva and her entire team.
Blushing.
They have been, if you want a group that is going to be as dedicated as you are, this is the group to hire. And the integrity and the character of the team, I could not have gotten this far. I would not have gotten this far without them. And I felt so supported throughout every step of the process. And the teams, you know, some of the teams is in Poland, some of the teams in Australia, and somehow everything just works despite the time zone differences. And it's just, I don't know how you do it, Eva, but in coordinating all of this, but I could not recommend your group, your team highly enough. So, and if anyone has questions for me, they're welcome to get my email from Eva or from Andrea. I would be happy to talk to anyone. I've talked to some of Eva's clients or clients about to come on board, and I just enjoy talking about it. So if people want to reach out to me, they're more than welcome.
Yeah, you have a very generous spirit, Melissa, and I like to think that it comes from the Polish and potentially the Irish side. We both love potatoes, so that's the common theme: potatoes and vodka, maybe a beer. So
the two groups are very similar.
Right. There's a lot of commonalities there. There's a lot of synergies, and I say it's the potatoes. But thank you so very much for spending your evening with us and for such kind words. I think, you know, for me personally, they mean a lot because I know how important it is to you, and hearing that you are seeing that dedication and support towards that journey is just amazing. So have a wonderful evening, and as Melissa said, if anyone wants to connect, they can, and we'll be filing your application very soon. So keep studying that Polish, and do widzenia.
Do widzenia, dobranoc.
Dobranoc, that's it. Thank you so much, Melissa. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.